Hey, Cap fans, it's Rick here, and just wanted to give you a heads up. My microphone had an issue while recording here, so it doesn't sound as good as normal, but fear not. I do have it fixed for next episode, so just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So enjoy this really fun and insightful conversation with the two writers of the Captain America Sentinel of Liberty series, Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly.
This is Alana Smith, and you're listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 91 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. I am your host, Rick Verbanis, and alas, not as always, my best gosh darn partner, Bob Lucius, could not join us today. He's feeling under the weather, but he is here in spirit. He did help prepare for this opportunity to talk with our guest today. So you are going to have a three-person conversation. It's just not going to be Bob. Instead, we have two guests today. We have Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly. And both of our guests are writers of books, of screenplays, and of course, comics. For DC, they've written stories starring Batman, Nightwing, Green Arrow, and for DC Digital, series like Gotham Garage and Genlock. And recently, for DC, they've also been writing Batman Beyond, and they have a new series out, Aquaman and the Flash, Void Song. They've also recently worked on Harbinger for Valiant, and then last year, they broke into Marvel writing Kang the Conqueror miniseries and crushed it. But we're most excited to talk about their new Captain America series, Sentinel of Liberty. So, welcome to the show, Jackson and Colin.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Rick, absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Well, you guys have found your peeps. These are your people right here, Captain America fans.
Awesome.
We're excited. We're excited to be here. We've been Captain America fans our whole lives, so I feel like we're among you.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, before we dive into, maybe we could start with a little bit about how the two of you met and how you broke into writing comics.
Sure.
Yeah.
The story can be very long, so we're gonna do the nice little truncated version so we can get to what people really want to know about. But Colin and I met in college. We were both at USC, the University of Southern California. I was in the film program as a directing student, and Colin was in the screenwriting program. And we met through a mutual friend, David Server, who put us together, and we were immediately like oil and water. We did not really get along. I liked Colin fine. He was not a fan of this.
I really could not stand the man, honestly. He had all these opinions which were very smart, and everyone always thought they were so clever, and his writing was good, which is very frustrating because I insisted on being the best writer in any group we hung out with. So it was really kind of a frisson on my end in looking at someone who was just too close to who I was, which was kind of an oil and water, as Jack points out. But then eventually we were in a writing group together, and we really got a chance to start reading each other's stuff. And rather than being grumpy and butthurt about it, I read Jack's work, and it was this wonderful kind of character-oriented, very personal kind of work, which really wasn't something I was doing at the time.
Well, because I was reading Colin's work, and it was this huge blockbuster Michael Bay madness kind of stories, and I genuinely the kind of thing that I didn't know you could write. I was always so focused on little tiny plays, and I found myself, but it was the stuff that I was a big fan of, and so I became really enamored with his work. He became really enamored with my work. We became really good friends. And then when we graduated, we went on a road trip together out to Lollapalooza. We just drove across the country for a few days, drove back after the festival. And on our way there, because the middle of America is very broad and filled with empty spaces, there's not a lot to see in a lot of it. And so we just ended up making a lot of conversation between the two of us. And because it's the two of us and because we're both writers, we ended up talking about story a lot. And we came up with a movie on the way there that we outlined effectively by hand and then wrote in a hotel room on the way back. We ended up about a day ahead, and we split a computer and tried to write as much of it as we could. And neither of us had really collaborated like that before. We collaborated in ways. I'd written a comic book with David Server, the guy who introduced us. But this was like a whole different thing. We wrote like 80 pages in a single day, and they weren't terrible. And we were like, "What's happening here? Like, this is
what kind of magic is this that's going on?"
Yeah, and so we came back and sort of tried to see if we could apply that professionally, and the rest is history.
And here you are.
And it should be said that a lot of that kind of friendship was baked and pulled together by our weekly Wednesday comic book runs. There was one car between the three of us, so we'd pile in and we'd drive out to our local shop, which was across town. We'd get our comics. We would.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, David. We'd stop. We'd eat the greasiest pizza possible and just holler at each other about continuity, which all too often revolved around Captain America. He was a character that, as Jack pointed out, we absolutely loved. We were reading Young Avengers at the time. We were reading all of this stuff. And it was really, it was just formative in terms of building up our storytelling sense, so that Jack and I could really have that shared creative language that we built out of comic books. So when we pivoted to being actual creative partners, we shared a lot of that storytelling DNA, basically because we'd spent so much time arguing with each other, which, spoiler alert, is effectively how this relationship works.
All right. Well, so as a former comic book store owner, I had to cringe when you said the greasiest pizza ever. I'm hoping that was after you picked up your comics and not before.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yes. We would get the books. We would read whatever was like really on the foremost of our brain, like probably before we left the shop. Like we'd like buy them and then just like read them. And then we would go, whatever came out that week. I remember at the time, like Ultimate Spider-Man was kind of at its peak, and like the Brubaker Captain America run was like at its peak. Like there was just some really great stuff going on. And so we would get together and just dial in on that stuff together, which was a blast.
Very nice. Now you mentioned you split a computer. So that takes me to really my next question. And for listeners who've not maybe heard of how the two of you work together, can you take us through how the process works? Because, I'm familiar with when I see two writers, I go, oh, okay, well, one person was the plotter, the other person was the scripter. But, I don't know. How does that work with you guys?
Yeah, not like that. Our process is kind of very similar to how it's always been before we were writers, which is when we attack an idea, we will start stress testing it, and we will start coming up with the craziest stuff, and we'll effectively generally sit across the table from each other and just talk. We'll just bullshit, and we'll find the ideas that are cool and the ideas that are great. Some of our ideas will be terrible, and then you got the other guy sitting right there saying, that's not a good idea, which is great. You have a second brain to instantly start stress testing every single thing that kind of crops up until we eventually settle on a story that we can kind of both agree on as being awesome. And sometimes that takes a while. Sometimes we do need to go a little hammer and tongs because what is good can be very subjective. But the great thing is, between the two of us, even if one of us doesn't see it, that then stress tests the other guy in order to try and develop, well, here's what I'm actually trying to say. And if I can get Jack on board with my crazy idea, I know anybody can get on board with it, and vice versa. So it's a real great gate in terms of creating.
And then from a process perspective, that'll turn into an outline that's normally written by one of us, based on notes that we both take during those sessions. We don't sit there and take notes while we talk. We'll finish and then we'll be like, all right, great, let's get that on paper. And we'll get that on paper normally before we leave a session, because we don't want to lose anything. It's not like we record these sessions. Because we want to be able to just speak freely and feel like we can say whatever to one.
Yeah, we don't want any evidence.
Yeah, with no evidence left behind. Exactly. And then we'll write up an outline. That outline will get shared between the two of us. Depending on what that outline needs to be, that might be the outline that goes to the I was going to say the network, because we do a lot of TV stuff, but might go to whoever, right? It might go to whoever we're trying to get to approve us. So in comic books, our editor. And then that outline, once it's approved, okay, great. Now it's time to split up that outline and turn it into comics. Normally we'll have already broken out which issue is which, issue 1, issue 2, issue 3, etc. And so then we will take those and we'll do what we call a pagination, which is basically we'll go in and we will assign pages across the board. We'll be like, okay, so this outline, this beat probably needs 1 page, this beat probably needs 2 or 3 pages. It'd be really awesome if we could do a double page spread on this beat, whatever, right? We'll sort of figure that out together. and just talk that through. And that normally doesn't take very long because we have a very shared instinct on that stuff now. So that tends to only take a few minutes, really, unless it's like a very particularly like difficult project or one that we feel like needs to sort of be built from the ground up like that. But we have kind of a style that we tend to lean on, and we build that out. And then we split that up in half. And so half of that script will go to Colin and half of that script will go to me. He'll write pages for like a 20-page comic. He'll write pages 1 through 10. I'll write pages 11 through 20, or I will write 1 through 10. He'll write 11 through 20. We'll literally ask each other, like, what do you want to write? Like, what about this is more exciting for you? And then whichever, we'll generally have a passion for at least one scene that we really want to be the people to the first draft guy on it. And then we'll do those drafts. We'll trade. We'll rewrite one another. Sometimes a lot, sometimes not at all. And then we'll have a script. And generally that's how any given script by us turns out. It gets split in half, it gets worked on individually, and then it gets polished together by both of us together.
So based on your earlier days in your creative writing classes, do you guys still have those tendencies? Colin, are you still the big idea guy, and Jack, you're more of the intimate kind of story character thing?
Not really.
We used to kind of make that joke, but with every year that passes, like every writer is full of multitudes. Jack was writing smaller stories because that's what he can produce, being kind of from the background that he was. I was writing giant stories because no one told me I shouldn't. So it's like once we reach this level, I think, no, we're passionate about everything. Some of the most bitchin' stuff that anyone is going to read of us is, maybe that was written by Jackson, and some of the most heartbreaking stuff, hey, maybe that was written by me. The cool thing is, by the time, a comic script takes 2, 3, maybe 4 passes to get right. Generally, by the time we're actually at a final, air quotes, shooting script, right? The actual thing that's going to go off to the artists, I can't remember who wrote what. Like, we've really developed a singular voice at this point. So if you go back and look at an issue and say, hey, Jack, was this your line? Who knows? We don't remember anymore.
Honestly, who knows? Like most of the time it becomes an R line, which is why we refer to ourselves as a hive mind. It's not just like a branding exercise. We talk about the hive mind because people aren't really used to 2 writers operating as a single unit in comics. Those are very, very few and far between. And generally they are 2 big writers who've been teamed up on something, or they're 2 writers who are very individual who've been teamed up on something. And they'll have their own processes. A great example of this is like Tim Seeley and Tom King on Grayson, right? Tim and Tom were co-writing that book, but really all that meant was they were co-plotting that book, and then they were trading issues, and there were Tim Seeley issues and there were Tom King issues. And I think you can kind of see the difference between those issues. They're both great writers, but they have individual voices, and you can really tell a Tom book from a Tim book. Ours, we don't really work like that anymore. Like I can tell a Colin line from a Jackson line, and I think he can tell a Jackson line from a Colin line in a first draft. But after that, I dare anybody to be like, oh, that's a Colin line. Except if it's like a really specific joke. If you like know us and you're like, oh, that's something Jackson would think is funny or like whatever, then maybe you might catch it. But otherwise, I think we really are like a singular entity as far as like writing is concerned, and very rarely do we operate individually anymore, just because that's how we've been doing it for over a decade. We're just kind of used to it now.
But the joke answer is that I'm the right hand and Jack is the left hand, and we just sit next to each other, and then that's how it works.
Very nice.
Don't try that at home, young writers.
So in some past interviews, Jackson, there's a quote of you saying, with any hive mind story, it all starts from character, and since character is such a fundamental place to start good storytelling. How would you describe Steve Rogers, Captain America, and what are his essential attributes, maybe his qualities, his weaknesses? And then what is it about those essentials that make his story interesting even after 80 years?
Yeah.
So Steve, to me, is obviously a man who contains an enormous, contains multitudes. And as a result, when you approach him, you don't write by saying, who is Steve Rogers? Because I think if you just come in on it and you're like, who is Steve Rogers? Story doesn't really develop from that. What I mean to say from a story comes from character is that a story comes from character need from character want and from character conflict. And so generally what our stories do is they start from a place of trying to identify what this character needs, what stage they are in their life, and now. Because if you ask me who is Steve Rogers, it could take me 100 years to like tell you everything that Steve Rogers is, because this is a character who has, as you say, 80 plus years of actual publishing history and then 80 plus years of actual living history, right, in his own continuity. So there's so much of the 104 years of like in-universe continuity. Like, it's wild. So from us, what we do is we sit down and we say, what does this character need now? So to not avoid your question, in terms of Sentinel of Liberty and where we find Captain America at the beginning of our run, what we really discovered was a man who had been for a very long time living inside the suit. He had been living as the Shield, not as a man. He had been, even from our favorite runs, going back to like Brubaker, he was living in, yes, he was living in a city surrounded by other people, but his house was a big holographic hidden bunker, that no one knew about. So it wasn't like he was a man with community outside of the superhero community. He was a man who was fundamentally apart. And this is coupled with the sort of all-time things about Steve Rogers, like he is a man out of time. He is a man who doesn't entirely fit in with like society anymore. He's also a man who is by and large the quote unquote best of us. Like he demonstrates decency and goodness because he comes from a really underprivileged situation. He comes from being the smallest guy around. He comes from being a poor man. He comes from being a man surrounded by the Great Depression, surrounded by the height of World War II. This is a man who knows what it's like to go through struggle and then was empowered. And so he has this, he has this amazing moral compass coupled with this amazing physical ability to back it up. But what he doesn't have is a life, like a human, real life. He doesn't have people in his life. He has a girlfriend, but his girlfriend is also his crime fighting partner, and she's also probably the most volatile aspect of his life. He has one really close friend in Bucky Barnes, who is in and of himself, I think, a very complicated figure, and one who Steve projects a lot onto Bucky that might not actually be there, or that might be more complicated than Steve imagines. Steve was in a space where it felt really necessary to ground him in community, to ground him in people, and to remember what it meant to be Steve Rogers. And then once we had that, once we looked at that as a character standpoint, you're like, okay, well, now we're going to tell a story about a man who's just living in a apartment in Lower Manhattan. It's not much of a comic book story. It's a really great story. It sounds fun. We love to write it, but you got to get him into the Captain America suit at some point. It's a Captain America book. So how do you turn that into a superhero book? Well, great. Once you've engaged with what Steve Rogers needs, what Captain America needs is to really reckon with the legacy of his shield, of his legacy as a character, and as a man who's made a lot of decisions, including the decision to save his best friend Bucky using the Cosmic Cube and like deprogram him from his Winter Soldier time. This is a man who really needs, now that he's able to slow down, to reflect and reckon and really understand what being Captain America means. And we had such a great opportunity to engage with that, especially with Tochio and Yabochi taking Sam Wilson to that new height of Captain America and really being the public face of that. It gave Steve a chance to really think about what the shield meant to him, what the legacy meant to him, and what having a life would mean to him. And so that's what I mean when I say our stories come from character. We look at what the character requires, what we feel like the character is missing in their life, and what we imagine they don't even know they're missing in their life, right? What they want and what they need, which are just dramatic stress tests that we put everything through. And then we look at how a plot might support that, bring that out, grow that seed into a tree.
Yep.
Colin's like, what he said.
What he said. No, I mean, Jack hits it on the head. I think the key is like Steve has been in uniform, but he hasn't been wearing the uniform. He's been the uniform. Now, after the events of United States of Cap, he kind of sees the world. He sees what he's been missing, and he remembers what it's like to just be a person trying to do the best without powers. And I think that really clicked with him and awoken his humanity to a certain degree. So now he's looking at what it means to be Steve Rogers. And if once you're Steve Rogers, that means you're not just being the suit. You need to put on the suit. And now he's looking at that and asking himself, well, what does this suit really mean? What does this symbol really mean? What does this shield really mean? So basically, we want him, he's entering into an age, into a time of introspection. And we also really just, when you look at it, he's a member of the greatest generation. I think folks who have read issue 1 realize that with the radio company, we're introducing a bunch of people who can kind of actually talk to him at his level, because, we're so Cap, as Jack points out, is the best of us in a lot of ways. There's something for every generation to kind of see in him someone to aspire to be. But he's got jokes that no one gets. Like, he is a man out of time. And it was really important to not just give him new friends in contemporary Manhattan, but also to find him a group of people who can speak the language where he doesn't have to pretend that he's hip. He doesn't have to be cool so that Natasha doesn't make fun of him. Like, he can talk about his bunions, right? He can talk about the stuff that only older folks understand. Because even though he's fit as hell, man's 100 and what? I don't know his exact 104. Yeah.
Pretty sure 104. Yeah.
He's got complaints.
Right. Yeah. That was a great part. I mean, of issue 1 of seeing the radio crew. I don't remember the title that you guys gave them, the gang or whatever.
Radio company.
Company. Yeah. That was kind of heartwarming to see that, and some of the jokes that were going back and forth. And then the letterer did a good job by kind of coloring the bubbles, so which of the people were saying different things, and seeing them play amongst each other. It was fun. It was fun seeing Steve with his contemporaries. But listen, it was great seeing Steve just be Steve. We've been missing that to what you guys have pointed out. When you go back to earlier writers like Roger Stern, and J.M. DeMatteis, they did an excellent job of giving Steve friends, and not the super friends, right? That you mentioned
real
before.
Normal people.
Yeah, like Mark Grunwald did an excellent job with the super friends, but it was those Stern and DeMatteis that gave him a civilian life. And so in issue number 1, we get to see his new neighbor Amari. And then you introduce the art students, right? Mia, David, and Hudson. And that was great seeing that. I mean, it was fun. I mean, like, I'm a Steve guy. Now, don't get me wrong. Love Sam Wilson. I'm going to read that book, but I'm a Steve guy. And to me, if someone ever asked me, who's your favorite fictional character of all time? I don't tell them Captain America. I tell them Steve Rogers.
Steve Rogers. Yeah, bud. And humor is so important. Like, Steve is funny. It's not like funny, haha, but he's funny, charming, and he's got jokes. They're grandpa jokes, but they're jokes. And it was really important for us to bring that home. We actually, as you kind of pointed out in your intro for us, we're pretty new to Marvel. Happy to be here. But one of our first meetings on this, we sat down, and Tom Brevoort actually, which, yes, just getting notes from Tom Brevoort continues to be amazing. But he told us that when we move forward with this, we need to not just have it be super people having super talks, right? This isn't just superhero soap opera. You need real people to ground the story so that we understand what it is to be super heroic. And it's such a small note, but it's so smart. And once you get that,
I want to jump on that. It wasn't Tom's note to give him friends. We came in with give him friends.
Sure.
What Tom's note was he has to save people, which I thought was a really specific note that felt really interesting to give in the context of superhero comics, because, like, of course, but it's very easy when you're writing, especially in the Marvel canon, I think, because we are such Marvel nerds and the Marvel universe is so embedded and it is such a soap opera, it's very easy to forget that these are at their core rescue workers, and that aspect of them rescuing people was really important. So there was a sense of, as our plot kicks in, and as you start to get a sense of what we're actually doing and the ramifications thereof, there are a lot of superheroes who would have something to say about this, and will, especially by the second arc. But it's been deeply important to keep in mind that there need to be genuine stakes outside of things a superhero didn't know, or things that reframe the world the way the superhero would imagine it. They need to be people at risk who can be saved. And that doesn't necessarily mean Steve's friends. Steve's friends are not victims to be saved all the time. I think we play an interesting version of that you'll see within the first run. But it was Tom really blew my mind with that note, because it seems like the most obvious note in the world. Of course, superheroes should be saving people, but it is wild how easy it is to forget that when you're writing in the Marvel universe, and when you just want to have Steve and, Black Widow have a conversation for 20 pages. And it's like, no, remember, they're rescue workers. They got to do their job. They got to inspire. They got to stand out there.
Yeah, I would love to see those notes. We had Tom on the show. He's great.
He's the most brilliant. He's just the most brilliant person.
Yeah.
I think.
And did he tell you the story of how he got tricked into being discussed with Ed Brubaker on having Winter Soldier come back?
Not only that, when we started our run, when we came in with our outline, that we sent our pitch to Alana, and it was like the craziest pitch we could imagine for Captain America, and one we held on to for several years, just as something that, like, if they ever came to us with Cap, this is what we'd want to do, with no understanding that we would ever get to write Captain America, right?
Yeah, if I ever moved to the moon, here's what I'd want to do.
Right. But then they were like, hey, do you want to go to the moon? And it was like, I mean, sure. Like, and they said, like, you're probably not going to get the job, but you should pitch this, because, like, who knows who at Marvel will see what you've done, and people liked Kang, so, like, you should try this out. And so we're like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so we pitched this crazy idea.
And we'll be back right after this short break.
And when we finally got the gig, several weeks later and several documents later and lots of notes and calls and stuff later, when we finally were like, we are going to be writing Captain America Sentinel of Liberty, Tom got on the phone with us and said, look, when Brubaker did Winter Soldier, I asked him 100 questions, and he had to answer all my questions. And that's how I knew that it would work. What you guys are doing has similar ramifications, so I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. And I am going to make sure that you can answer all those questions, or we can't do this. And that maintains to this day. Like, anytime Tom is like, we still get this, where it's like, Tom will come in and be like, well, how does this work? Like, why exactly is this happening? And you're like, okay, like, we know this in our heads, but if that's not on the page, we got to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We all know what's going on. So he's a really incredible person to work with, because as I think a lot of writers who work with him will tell you, he is scant with his praise, and he is specific with his feedback. So if Tom ever comes back to you and says, this is good, you, like, even if it's just like, I like this, like, it's not like, again, he's not going to write how much he likes it. There's not going to be exclamation points everywhere. He's going to be like, this works. If Tom Brevoort says this works, you, like, do a little dance and fucking run around your apartment, because you're just thrilled that, like, you got there, right? And you know that he has the taste to back that up. Like, he's edited more of my favorite comics than I can imagine. So we're still a little starstruck to be working with him. It's pretty rad.
So let's get to that pitch, right? So when we had Alana on the show, she shared about your pitch and how she was just like, she's like, well, these guys didn't aim small, right? And her quote was, she said, immediately my brain was on fire, and how much she loved it and how great it was. She then went into your full pitch, detail by detail, and explained the next year's worth of stories. But perhaps maybe you could share them in your own words.
You're making a good joke.
Oh, no. But she did say
you saw both of our faces. You saw both of our faces drop there for a second.
Yeah. She did say you accomplished what she was hoping for, which was expanding the Cap universe, talking about it, making Captain America a destination again, possible spinoff books. So can you give us just a little glimpse into what that pitch was like and why her brain was on fire?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can start just by reading you the first 3 lines of the pitch, because they are not a spoiler anymore, and will tell you kind of how we walked into this. Like, this was how we opened our pitch. The shield is one of the most iconic images in the world. It stands for hope, justice, and the protection of the innocent. It also holds a secret, undiscovered until now, that will change the way Captain America views the 20th century and how he chooses to fight in the 21st. We did not aim low. We came in and said, we're going to change stuff. We're going to blow it away. We're going to recontextualize Captain America's mythos, and we're going to find a way to drive it forward. Our objective was nothing less than trying to come in and do an iconic run on the character, which is an absurd objective on a character as iconic as Captain America. But if you don't aim at the sky for this, I felt like if we just did another Red Skull story, we would be doing the character a disservice, because that is not what he needs right now. So we came in with the objective of effectively bringing almost like a national treasure element to Captain America's shield and to Captain America's mythos, to understanding that there are secrets that have been hidden in plain sight. I want you to be able to see a person in a Captain America t-shirt and be like, I know the secret meaning of that. And the idea that there is a secret meaning of that symbol, and that it is something that can be diagrammed and understood and can be built out and can generate a century of history. That's where we started. And then finding a way to apply that to character and eventually hang it on a real step forward in the relationship between Bucky Barnes and Captain America, Steve Rogers, to take Steve and Bucky and put them through something that truly tested their friendship and revealed the true character of both men. That was our aim and objective. And we didn't shy away from it, mostly because we never thought they'd do it. We never thought in a million years they'd do it. So we just aimed at what we thought would just be the coolest, most wild, most, I mean, for lack of a better term, this is a pun, but you won't understand why yet, game-changing take on Captain America, and then really try to like take it from there.
Colin's rolling his eyes.
It's okay.
Yeah.
That's the partnership.
He knows the pun.
But I think also something Alana said there at the start is 100% true. New characters and new stories. We love remixes as much as everyone. One day we will write Captain America punching Red Skull in the face, and it will feel so good. But our point here is to create a new suite of villains, a new problem that he's never seen before, to really challenge not just him as a superhero, but him as a man and his own perception of who he has been. Because we, Jack and I, were able to find pieces within the Marvel continuity where we could tell a story. And sometimes there are those you can kind of tiptoe through the raindrops and see where a story exists that no one has touched. And that is what we found. Something that we can weave into the history of the Marvel universe that has been there the whole time. And that, I think, is what lit her hair on fire. Because there's a story that seems like it was just waiting to be told. And we're the ones who cracked it open. She also loves Bucky to pieces, and the story we are telling to between Cap and Buck is important. It's going to be heavy for both of them, but Jack and I know what it's like to really kind of not only work with your best friend, but also end up on different sides of an argument, and that stuff can be heavy and that can be real. And that is one thing that we do not want to do ever with our characters, which is make things easy for them. Easy is bad for drama.
Yeah. So, you're talking about changing some things, and it sounds like a really big story. And I think after you read issue number 1, a little bit about, there is this mystery behind the shield. Fans can be pretty critical, in case you didn't know that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Especially when it comes to beloved characters. And so they can be a little unforgiving if creative teams take liberties. So how do you prepare yourself for that? Because talk to Nick Spencer, talk to various cap writers from the last 10 years. How are you prepared for that?
Oh, I don't need to talk to Nick, I can talk to Captain America at Disneyland, who literally, when he discovered the guy playing Captain America, looked at me and he learned that I wrote the comics. I think my friend who was with me was like, he writes the comics. And he turned to me and said, "Don't make me a Nazi again." And I said, "You got it, Cap." Truthfully, I don't think it is in the writer's toolbook for us to make decisions based on fan reaction. And that isn't to say that we don't hope that fans love what we're doing and that we don't think that fans will dig it. I think they will. I think the reviews of Captain America #1 have been overwhelmingly positive. We've been really happy to see people respond to our take. If you like where one goes, I think you will like where the rest of the book goes. I think we are hinting pretty strongly at what we're doing and the tone and the objectives. But if you don't, if people hate the left turns that we take, then they hate the left turns that we take. But we are fans. We are dedicated to this character. We have done an enormous amount of research just by living our life as, constantly reading Captain America fans. But then when we got the book, we also went back and reread the character's publishing history. Like, we don't take this in any way lightly, and we're in no way trying to run roughshod over any story that's been told. We just want to tell the next story and hope that people are on board to hear it.
And I think that's an important way of putting it too, is the next story. I don't think that we are telling a Colin Jackson story. Like, we are presenting this in our way, but as Jack pointed out at the start of this, like, this is the story that Cap needs right now. This is the story that he needs to move forward as a man and as a hero. And I feel like we're just kind of giving it legs and giving it voice. But we're going to stand by our art. This is the story we want to tell 100%. It's the story that Alana and Tom and everyone has gotten on board with. We genuinely hope the fans do too. And I think they will. I think the pages are full of respect. And if anyone does want to have a chat with us, we're available on Twitter.
So let's talk about issue 1 and a part that I think, most people did love. And that was taking Steve back to his old apartment where he lived with his mom in the 1930s. And it was just a beautiful idea, number one. And then you have, Carmen Carnero just knocking it out of the park, right? And she's drawing these panels beautifully, juxtaposing Steve's memories with the present reality. And could you take us a little bit through the thinking that led to that scene, and was it portrayed just as you envisioned, Carmen do it justice?
Well, it was really important for us to send Steve. Obviously, he needed to move somewhere. He needed to live amongst the people somewhere. New York is his city, so it was pretty clear to us that that's where we wanted to take him. And then when we started thinking about it, and I think, in that process, we said, well, he's got to go home. And only then did we realize, no, that's not just emotional, that's literal. Like, where we talked to Tom, we were like, "Tom, where did he live?" And he's like, "Oh, well, he lived pretty much in this right little part of town and in Southeast Manhattan." And we were like, awesome. What a weird place now. Like, his little tenement. And, New York is still filled with these old buildings that are effectively, neglected and forgotten. So putting him there in what is effectively one of the most, points of power for the American century was really interesting and cool. And then getting to tell that story through Carmen's juxtaposition, because this was one of the first issues we'd written with her on Captain America. We actually worked with her. You mentioned earlier Gotham City Garage. She was one of our digital artists for that book. But not knowing what she was going to be bringing to Captain America, we were a little trepidatious writing out a scene like, the contemporary setting of the street is being juxtaposed by illusions and memories of the past. What is an artist going to bring to that idea? And then we start getting these pages and we realize that there's no need for concern because Carmen gets it 100% and is able to execute it just absolutely stunningly.
Carmen is one of the finest artists in comics. I have no bones about just saying it outright. Like, I don't think there's a thing she can't make beautiful. And every issue we have worked to push her and engage her and give her more wild, interesting, cool ways to tell story with us. And with every issue, I think we learn a little bit more about how outclassed we are. I mean, she's just absolutely incredible. And when you see what she is learning to do with action on this book, which there's some teases of it in issue 1, but issue 2 is the first time I think she really just unloads and shows you what she can do with a spread. We're developing a new action language that is specific to Sentinel of Liberty, and which I think, if there's any justice in the world, will become iconic for the character through Carmen's lens. I really just think it's we are deeply, deeply lucky to be doing this book with Carmen. She is the reason it works. Like without her emotional, beautiful take on Steve and her mastery of action and world building, the crazy swings we're trying to take would never land.
And the entire book hangs so much on Steve, as we pointed out, not Captain America. You need to be able to have Steve look wistfully out of a window and think about his long lost love. And that's a very hard expression for someone to nail, unless acting is one of your key components of your art. And Carmen's acting is gosh darn beautiful.
The thing that I also just want to sort of shout out, there's really not been a long history or tradition of female artists drawing Steve Rogers. His core book has almost never been drawn, certainly as an ongoing stature, has almost never been drawn by a woman. Carmen brings, I think, because we are seeing this book through a female gaze, a completely different vibe on Steve. I think her Steve is informed by a sensitivity and a sort of sensuality is a weird word to bring to Steve Rogers, but there is something very attractive about her Steve, both like physically, but also just like soulfully.
Yeah, emotionally.
And I think she really brings that forward. I don't want to like attribute that to her gender, but I think it is interesting to see how much that comes through from Carmen's pen.
So speaking of that, sensuality and lost loves and things like that. I read where when the two of you write together, sometimes the difference is that Colin likes to bring sex into the story, and Jackson doesn't really think about it much. Maybe a little romance.
Wow, that is a deep cut reference to one of our interviews. You have done your work, my friend.
I try to come prepared. So with Sharon Carter, quote unquote, called away on secret business, did Jackson win out here, or is Colin gonna sneak in a booty call for Steve and maybe like Diamondback shows up?
We can neither confirm nor deny these things. No, the
Sharon... This is a wildly. Go ahead.
Oh, the Sharon not showing up yet, being off on a mission, that has nothing to do with this. We had too many players on the board and we needed Sharon gets to wait in the wings. We've assured Sharon stands on the internet that she's coming. We love her. She'll be around. We're just going to take a bit before she shows up. But yes, an ironically timed question.
But I will say,
please go.
Yeah, ahead. Ironically timed question. Given what we just wrote, that what I will say is, we have a plan for Sharon that really doesn't have to do with her romantic connection to Steve.
You've said, the new series won't be greatest hits, right? You guys mentioned that. But we did get treated to Roger Aubrey, the former invader, the Destroyer, and someone wearing his uniform in present day. Can we expect maybe more blasts from Cap's past, in this series?
What we can say is that we are very aware of Cap's past and we absolutely love it, specifically because he is, as we mentioned, he's part of the greatest generation. And those relationships are incredibly important to him. He is looking backwards as much as he is existing in the present. So yes, we are absolutely going to see some elements of his past coming back 100%. Roger Aubrey in particular was a character that we just really loved, and we wanted to give him someone who not just knew him as a man, but also knew him as a hero, to kind of give him a counterpoint to speak to. So once we kind of lensed in on the idea of who Roger was going to be and how we were going to use him, we found a very vibrant place in the story for him.
The other thing there is that this was being a story about legacy and being a story that encompasses a century of history. It felt important to not leave Steve on an island as far as dealing with those concerns stretched. And so when you look at the invaders, Namor's got a lot on his plate, especially given all of his engagements with the current run with Avengers, and obviously there's a pretty extensive run with Human Torch recently on Iron Man. The Invaders have gotten a lot of exposition lately, and it felt like time to show one that hadn't been seen for a bit and really give him his own space. Roger is a character with some really interesting history. Obviously, is well connected to the original Destroyer as they were lovers, and is in that way one of Marvel's earliest canonical gay heroes. He's also Stan Lee's first original Marvel superhero Destroyer, and in all those respects, he felt like a character who really deserved to be here and have his voice heard in this story in particular. So that was just a sort of a dream come true for us, because it's been a character that we've always wondered, like, could you do something with Destroyer, especially given the wide-ranging conversations that our society's been having about anti-fascism, which is Destroyer's whole thing. So it felt like, he's the sort of militant anti-fascist of all of them. He's I think the first guy who has almost that Frank Castle, Steve Rogers relationship, where it's like, you might go a little further than Steve would, and that might kind of throw Steve for a loop. And that felt like a really fun engagement to play with Destroyer as we move forward.
I want to thank you for bringing him back, because I really didn't know much about him. So after reading the first issue, it really piqued my interest, and I went back and did some research on him. So thanks for doing that. I look forward to more characters. And listen, I'm a lifelong Cap reader, right? From the 60s to now, but you start pulling these older characters, and guys like me even still are like, who? So thank you for doing that.
that feels great. You're very welcome.
So let's talk about Bucky a little bit. You brought him up, and this is a Steve series, right? But you've made it very clear Bucky's going to be a central piece to the story. And so when we spoke with Alana, she said she felt there was not enough time for post Bucky breaking his brainwashing and Steve to be together. And she said that she kind of mentioned this to you guys, and you both were enthusiastically on board. Why are you interested so much about Bucky, and what can we expect? How much of this story is going to be him?
So Colin and I kind of have a history ever since Hacktivist, our very first book together, of writing about male friendship. We're doing it again right now in Aquaman Flash Void Song, which is sort of our story about friendship within marriages. That's really a story about like two wife guys, as we are two wife guys, and we really wanted to write about that. And we try to find these places to talk about ourselves within the context of these stories and make it personal to ourselves. And so obviously caustic and collaborative male friendship is a thing that we are very well versed in. It's a thing we understand. It's a thing that we live, and so we can really write what we know when it comes to that. Even if we don't know what it's like to be a super soldier, we know what it's like to have a best friend and be in a disagreement. And so this felt like a really great opportunity to just vibe in on that immediately. That's number one. Number two is we were giant fans of the Brubaker run. I just love that run. It is iconic. It is definitive for me. I think that run is an all-timer as far as Captain America is concerned. But my one bone to pick with it has always been that I think that the Cosmic Cube, and I understand why it was done this way. This isn't really a criticism at all of Ed, who I hold in the highest esteem. It's simply a matter of the pace of superhero comics, especially in the era. the way that Bucky came back from his brainwashing wasn't in the way that people who say have gotten into the character through the MCU recognize. In the MCU, he's gone through an enormous amount of redemption. He's gone through a whole step out. He had a whole 6-hour series about dealing with it. In the comics, he was unsnapped, brainwashed by the cosmic cube.
In a
moment, became Bucky again, and effectively didn't have his memories as the Winter Soldier anymore. And so then whenever he discovers something that he did as the Winter Soldier, there's never really a question of like, oh, did Bucky do that? It's like, oh, that's a thing that the Winter Soldier did. And like Bucky gets to be a little bit scot-free from that. We have been very invested in the idea of turning that around and making Bucky look at that, like look at the thing he does not want to look at and recognize that that was him. And what that means is understanding that the Winter Soldier is maybe not as simple a story as we've been led to believe it is. And that maybe there are roots of that go deeper, that connect to Bucky earlier in his life, and that connect to Captain America earlier in his life. Roots that we started to seed in the Bucky one-shot in Devil's Reign. So if you read that, you can really see the initial steps that we're going to be taking on that. And then by issue 6 of Sentinel of Liberty, I think you'll have a very clear idea of the next steps that we are taking in Bucky Barnes' story. But he just felt like a character who was absolutely ripe to step into a new life, because he's tried to be a father, say, to RJ, and he's tried to be a partner to Sam, and he's tried to be a sort of espionage assassin. He tried to be an alien prince for a while. He's tried to be all kinds of things, and none of it's ever stuck. Because he doesn't have a mission, and he doesn't really know who he is without a mission. And so we wanted to finally give him a mission that took him a place that he couldn't easily disengage from, and really had to like stress test that character and push him to a further place. So,
and it's at the core, it's a story about trauma. He has so much unexamined trauma because it magically got waved away. Similar to like, oh, well, you have real bad depression. Welcome to Lexapro. Well, Lexapro is great. It certainly fixes your problems, but it doesn't solve your problems. You're treating the solution, you're treating the symptoms, but not the cause. So we really felt like it was time to start looking at the cause of this stuff and really look at who he is as a man, in the same way that Steve needs to take off the mask and look what it means to be Steve Rogers. Bucky, unfortunately, all he wants to do is wear the mask, but he can't. He is stuck with being James Buchanan Barnes.
Well, you mentioned the Devil's Reign Winter Soldier one shot. I want to give a plug on that. I mean, please, for everybody out there who hasn't read it, check it out. I thought it was fascinating that Bucky and Wilson Fisk were basically fighting each other while one was sleepwalking and the other one was daydreaming. That was brilliant. You guys probably can't tell me who came up with that, but it was brilliant.
It was a joint effort.
Yeah,
genuinely. We were separated at the time, so we came up with that one remotely. I was with my in-laws in Massachusetts, and the challenge came our way. We were both voraciously reading Chip's Daredevil run and wanted to do something that lived up to the promise of that run, and his characterization of Wilson Fisk, who is obviously just like such an iconic character. And so I think we started talking a lot about what we needed out of Bucky moving into Sentinel of Liberty, because we already knew we'd written the first issue of Sentinel of Liberty before we wrote that. So we knew where we were taking Bucky. And we were like, all right, now that we know where we're taking Bucky, let's figure out how we can step it there and fill in some of this so that somebody isn't totally blindsided by where we're going. And so I think that issue is, I second your recommendation, not because I think the issue is great, though I do, but like that's very egotistical. But because it is core to the book. I hope it is collected in our trades, because it is, I think, fundamentally important to the story that Bucky is going through in these stories. And without it, you're going to be missing a core element of Bucky's journey.
Yeah, I would say that's like the Bucky Barnes zero issue. If Captain America zero is the Cap zero issue, I'd say that's the Bucky Barnes zero issue. Yeah.
I want to, Colin, there's a quote from an interview with the Geek Network, and I want to talk about this because I think as Steve fans and as him being the moral exemplar, I want to just read this quote. It says, where are the people who are supposed to be saving us. And the truth of the matter is, we have to be those heroes. I'm not going to run out there with a cowl because I'm not the knight. I'm a writer. We all do what we can do. The weapon in our tool belt is telling stories that can inspire and that can illuminate and can maybe show people a path forward, even if it's couched in a super rad shield thrown by a handsome blonde man. That's what we want to do, and that's what where we want to bring our stories. So can you speak a little bit more about that and how you view comics as not just entertainment, but a medium for inspiring, informing, educating, and maybe even, call to action?
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. This is really the core of why we do this. Jack and I didn't come to this town, being LA, being Hollywood, to make fluff. Like, you come here because you care about stories passionately, and not just telling them, but because inevitably somewhere in your life, a story has had a transformative impact in your life. Our passion is to tell those stories, to try and facilitate that change, not just in terms of emotionality. Like, we desperately want to help young people find a voice. We want to help people realize more about themselves through our work, but also the country is on fire. And every day we are looking at things that are terrifying and things that really shake the core of our beliefs. And it is incredibly important that if we can use this work to especially uphold Captain America's ideals, like Steve Rogers is frankly who we should all be trying to be. So by showing him in this light and kind of by holding him up, we really hope that we can tell a human story, that people realize that he is not just a flag, not just a symbol, but an actual man making the choices that we can make every single day. It's corny as hell, but we can all carry the shield. And that's something that we think is really important. It's why we put it right there in the first issue. The shield it's emotion. It's in our hearts. It's what we can strive to be. And hopefully through showing that demonstration that it's not Cap's powers that make him a good man, it's just his damn heart that makes him a good man. We will show people that this is something we can all utilize. This isn't a superhero ability. It's a human ability.
All right, guys, it's time I showed you this. So Bob and I made, because we have a Facebook group, we have like over 4,000 Cap fans over there. And so we made these challenge coins. And so nice. On one side, you have Cap's shield. And I don't know if you can see the attributes there, but these are different characteristics.
Oh, cool.
But here's the best part. Ready? What would Cap do?
Oh, love it.
What would Cap do, my dude?
Yep. So we want to send these to you guys for being guests on the show. So we'll get with that.
I will cherish it.
Yeah, amazing.
And genuinely, it's a question that we ask ourselves all the time. I had a recent thing. I'm not going to go into like the whole story, but I had this recent experience where like I had a guy in a social situation. Like I was in with a bunch of my friends, and there was like a new guy, and he was acting really weird and was like doing some kind of hurtful stuff to people that I liked. And it was in the middle of like a party, and it was everyone, it was a very like sort of like joyous scenario, and I didn't want to like crap on anybody's time, but at the same time I was like really put off by the way he was acting, and felt like somebody needed to like say something and do something. And I literally had a like what would Cap do moment where I went to my wife and I was like, should I do something? And she was like do what you feel is right. And I was like, well, what I feel is right is Steve Rogers. So what does Steve Rogers do in this scenario? And I was like, cool, that's what I do. And I went, and it was not like I turned in a big fight. I took the guy to the side and I was like, I want you to understand what you're doing. And it wasn't, we didn't get into a big fight. We didn't do a thing. He actually was like, oh, thank you for stopping me. And I was like, cool, man. And then we like walked away. And it was like a totally non-toxic environment and like experience. And I blame Steve. Like it's weird. You hear about that like Grant Morrison, like totemic, I like commune with the soul of Batman. And I've always thought that was like a little overwrought. And then I went through it then and I was like, no, I communed with the soul of Steve Rogers. Like, yeah, I guess.
Yeah,
like,
that's what we live by. That's
man.
Yeah. Right. All right. So one last question for me. Our listeners are obviously Cap diehards, right? That said, not all of them read current Cap comics, right? So
they should.
I know.
Gasp.
Right. So like
now's the time to start.
Almost 2/3 of our listeners are in that 45 to 59-year-old range, right? So,
Okay.
so some of them are going to be like, yeah, like if it came out in the last 10, 20 years, it doesn't compare to what I loved growing up. So what do you say to those listeners? Why should they try this series? And trust me, up until this point, if they're not compelled now after listening to you guys, I don't know what will, but here's your last shot.
So I don't know that this cuts the mustard, but here's my genuine response whenever anybody's like, why take a chance on a Jackson Collin book? Why read a Hive Mind book at all? Because we are trying. We are trying hard. We are caring about this a lot. We are working hours and hours and hours to bring something to the table that is new and that is fresh. We are not always going to succeed. We are often going to overwrite. We are often going to throw too many concepts on the table. There's going to be a lot of Jackson and Collin stuff all over this stuff. And and that's just because we're here and we have ideas and we want to bring stuff to the table. But we are going to try. We are going to, for lack of a better word, we're not even going to try. We're going to do. And we are going to make it happen for those fans. We aren't doing that for us. This isn't an exercise in ego. This is an exercise in bringing stories that are worth your time and money to the table, because there is nothing I hate more than picking up a comic and being like, man, I just spent $4 on something that effectively told me a story I've heard 100 times. We are going to tell you a story you have not heard 100 times. I know it might seem like there's a secret in the shield. Sounds like a story that you've heard 100 times. I guarantee you haven't heard this one, because I've read every Captain America comic that's ever been published. And I can guarantee you they've never told this story. We are trying. We are passionate. And if you don't like a word that you've heard from us on this podcast, at least take our word. You can even take your eyes word for the fact that Carmen Carnero is one of the greatest artists to ever touch this character. And you could just ignore the words and read the book for Carmen's art, and it would be gorgeous.
She's crushing
just some beautiful, beautiful Captain America art. I can't believe I'm saying this, but like genuinely, even after issue 1, you have no idea. Wait until you see what she's doing. Every issue just blows our mind.
But I also think that the point of this is that we knew that those readers are out there. And the point of this run is, yes, it's new ideas, it's new concepts, but they're built on the bones of 100 years of history. So those fans who have already read so much Captain America, they're the ones who are going to get the most out of this book, because they're going to understand the legacy that he is trying to uncover, that he is trying to wrap his head around. I'm like, it's great for new Captain America readers, 100%. It's great for folks who maybe just got started with, United States of Cap or Ta-Nehisi Coates' run. But for the diehards, you are going to see stuff that will have the more casual fan scratching their head, and which you will say, holy shit, I can't believe those madmen did it.
All right. I'm going to hold you to it. All
right.
We're going to do a 60-second quick spin, quick answers, right? These are some questions.
Lightning round.
Quick
lightning
questions
round.
from some of our listeners. All right. Ash Barnes, not a real name, but she loves Bucky Barnes.
Right.
She says,
I know Ash from Twitter.
Okay. She said, we've had 2 Ventolin mentions now from Bucky. So that was Devil's Reign and issue number 1. Should we expect to see her at all in the future?
No. All which is to say, I think Alesh Cott's take on Bucky Barnes, him and Marco Rudy, I think that their take on Bucky Barnes is stellar. I think it's magic. It changed my life. It made me rethink the way that I thought about trauma and violence and all that kind of stuff. It made me rethink what I thought about Bucky Barnes, and I really want to hold that forward in this book. That book is very personal to me. But Ventolin's story has been told. It's what Bucky learned through his relationship with Ventolin that needs to get examined and move forward now. So the story is not about, and nor is our concern about getting Ventolin and Bucky back together at all. This isn't really like a shipping situation. It's that was a really key and core scenario for his progress as a man. The idea that the lost glove is happy is Bucky in a nutshell, man. I think it's just art, high art. So we wanted to pay tribute to it.
Colin, does he know what rapid fire means?
I'm sorry. I know. I'm sorry.
It's okay. This is the hive mind.
All right. Aaron Paul asks, R.J. Boyle from Winter Soldier and the Natural from Falcon and Winter Soldier. Will we see any of these in this series?
No.
Okay.
I love them. No plans for them.
What happened between Bucky's cat, Alpine, and Misty? Do you have any, you're gonna explore that at all? Because I saw something on Twitter about 5 pages of Alpine's belly getting rubbed.
Teehee. We got a lot of Alpine plot coming. He's the secret core to the entire thing. He's got all those. I don't.
She. Female cat.
Apologies, Outline.
But no, I can't tell you what happened between Alpine and Misty. Can tell you that Alpine is weirdly core to this book. We can't help ourselves. We love cats.
Joshua Van Dyne asks, of all the Cap writers that came before you, do you have a favorite?
It's Grunwald or Brubaker for me. With Mark Waid easily sitting in that third slot.
Yeah, actually, same. Grunwald stuff was kind of what I cut my teeth on as a fan. I have a massive soft spot for it. I think it's totally rad, but I mean, it's really hard to point to anything better than Winter Soldier.
Awesome. Last one, Capman. And I'll just read this comment because he and I agree there's a difference between super soldier and superhero and which one we prefer. We'll leave it at that. He said, I just read the first issue and the part where Cap blocks Bucky's kill shot made my heart sing. My question is, the research you did, basically getting into the historian, obviously you did a lot of research on Cap Comics, but with Steve being from the New Deal era, how much of history did you kind of look into as far as that type of thing as well?
Great question, actually. History, and weirdly prescient, and a great one to end on. History is incredibly important to our story. When I'm talking about tiptoeing through the raindrops of history, we're not just talking about Cap continuity. We are talking about the history of the last century. We feel strongly, like, obviously Steve is a soldier, and I think that's one of the important things to remember is, like, he kills. He has killed before. Sometimes that is, unfortunately, the end result of saving the day. But it's never his first choice. I think that duality between what Bucky's willing to do and what Cap prays never has to be done is going to be core moving forward for us.
Perfect.
Yeah, 1,000%. I would say that just we're giant history buffs, and I think it's not like we got Captain America and then we're like, shoot, we better learn about 20th century history. We are big history nerds, and getting a chance to invest that into a book was a real dream come true for us. So I think that's just a place where we're a really nice fit, ideally, for the material, certainly a nice fit for our own pitch.
So we talked about Aquaman and Flash, Void Song. What else is keeping you busy nowadays? Any other projects coming up that you guys want to kind of let the listeners know, who they read this and they go, wow, we love this writing. Where else can we get more of Jackson and Collin?
If you're loving Captain America, you should check out Batman Beyond Neo Year over at DC Comics. Really, really proud of that book. We are 3 issues in. It's another book where, like, you don't need to have ever read a Batman Beyond book or even have seen the cartoon to, like, get in on our take. Our take is a fresh start. It's building on new stuff. It's building on a big status quo change from Batman Urban Legends #7. So I recommend if you can find that issue and then find Neo Year, we're about halfway through that run. It's going to be pretty great. And sales have been pretty killer. So I hope to be able to say, like, we'll be doing more. We'll see. And we have a bunch of secret stuff that we're doing that I can't talk about yet.
Pretty soon it has been announced, folks, over also at the Noble Competitor. They're doing a run called One Bad Day, where each villain is getting a almost Killing Joke sized, oversized story. And we are doing an outstanding story. We are doing ours is about Clayface, and it's one of the most personal works we've done in a long time. Clayface, obviously an actor. We are in Hollywood here, surrounded by actors, and frankly, we know the pain of rejection incredibly well. So we're pouring a lot of personal history and pain into that story. If folks dig our particular brand of tragedy, they will be over the moon for it.
When does that come out?
February of next year.
Okay. All right.
That's going to be a while out, with art by Hermenico. It's going to be something else. I'm really, really, really proud of that story, and it was really painful to write. So that's generally when you know it's something solid. And then if you want to try something totally freaking different from us that you can get at your local store, we have a creator-owned book called Joyride that is our like classic work. At this point, it's a few years old, but we did it with Marcus Toe, who's on Excalibur. So if you're and now Shang-Chi. So if you're a Marvel fan and you like what Marcus Toe does and you like what we do, you should check out Joyride. It's like 12 issues of punk rock teenage Star Trek. It's about a bunch of teenagers who steal a spaceship and run away and try to never come back. It is just a total joy, no pun intended. And means a lot to us. So if you like what we're doing on Cap, you might very well like Joyride.
Is that like collected in a trade paperback? Is that?
It is. Yeah. There are 3 trade paperbacks from Boom that you can get. They are bright yellow, bright orange, and bright pink. They're very easy to find.
You can also find them on Comixology, I believe.
Yeah, and Amazon. Yeah.
But also what we point out is, especially to those the readers who maybe in the the 45 to 55 demographic, I'm gonna bet they like Star Trek.
Oh yeah, you guys wrote some books, right?
And if my friend, yep. So if anyone out there is a Star Trek fan, they're jonesing for some classic Kirk, Spock, Bones content. Our run on Star Trek Year 5, it's 4 issues. It takes place over the last year of the
25 issues.
25 issues. What I say, 12? That's silly.
I think you said 4.
It's late. It's 25 issues. It's the last year of the 5-year mission as the Enterprise comes home. Some of the work that we are most proud of. The only thing we love more than Captain America is Star Trek. So in both cases here, we're just absolutely pouring our good gracious everything.
And that's with Jim McCann and Brandon Easton and Jody Hauser and Paul Cornell. Like, we had just a murderer's row of amazing writers who came in and did that writer's room with us. We were the showrunners on that book, quote unquote. It was a real blast. So yeah, you like us on Cap, go find all of those books. They're all great, I promise.
And what are the best ways for fans to follow you?
I'm on Twitter at Jackson Lanzing and on Instagram at Found in the Wild.
And I'm on Twitter at CP Kelly.
Awesome. Well, listen, guys, it has been a real joy Rapid Cap with you guys. I read I read 0. I read the first issue. As a huge Steve fan, I am so excited for this series. I love the fact that you guys are it's Captain America, it's Steve, it's both. I have a lot of faith in what's coming ahead. So you got a big fan on my side, and I know listeners are going to love it.
Awesome.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. And we hope to be back in 6 months to talk about what happened after issue 6. We'll see if you still love us.
See if you still like us after issue 6. All right.
All right. It's a date.
Really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for having us. This was a great, very thoughtful conversation. It's clear your love for Cap shines through, and we hope you continue to enjoy the run. Really, thank you very much.
Excellent. All right, thanks, guys.
Right. Take it easy, man.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Well, that was a really fun conversation, and so looking forward to what Jackson and Colin have planned for this series. If you haven't checked out issue number 1, I highly advise you pick it up. And then issue 2 comes out today on the day that this episode launches on July 6th. So rush out to your local comic book shop and make sure you pick up issue 2 today as the story continues. And then come back next Wednesday for episode 92. Bob will be back, and we actually have another guest on the show, Cap fan James Foley, who is on to talk as we go through the next part in our Captain series. This will be Captain Part 3, which covers Mark Grunwald and Kieran Dwyer's Captain America 342 through 344, which is a really fun story featuring Viper and the Serpent Society and Ronald Reagan as a reptile. It's a super long episode, as you could probably imagine, but you know what? It's summertime. Sit by the pool, sit in a chair, go to the beach, go on vacation, take a long trip. You've got cool Captain America stories to keep you company. All right, that's going to do it for me. This is Rick Verbanis signing off, and thanks so much for listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.